Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. There's even a brand new Brigadier General tier where you can get a shout out on a Commander's Quarters episode that's dedicated to you. Hey everyone, Mitch coming in from the Commander's Quarters studio. Welcome to the show. So today's episode comes to you courtesy of Ben, who's been supporting this channel as a General tier patron. I truly couldn't do this without the support from amazing patrons like Ben, so again, Ben, thank you so much. And actually, for today's episode, Ben's gonna handle the intro for me.
Hi Mitch, this is Ben from St. Louis. For my deck tech, I'd love to see you build around Vega the Watcher, focusing on casting spells with Cascade, Suspend, Rebound, and Foretell to draw lots of cards.
So as Ben said, today's deck tech's gonna be built around Vega the Watcher, focusing on spells that essentially draw you extra cards thanks to the Commander's trigger. Vega the Watcher is a 2/2 bird spirit with flying that costs 1 white-blue. It has, whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, draw a card. So with the right spells in this deck, like Ben mentioned, we can draw an absurd amount of cards throughout the game. Essentially, Vega the Watcher can turn nearly every single spell in this deck into a cantrip, and yeah, that's a ton of value. So we can cast spell after spell after spell and draw card after card after card and get way ahead of our opponents. And even with a budget restriction, we are going to be outdrawing our opponents in absolutely no time. And for this deck, the budget restriction that I'm imposing is that every single card in the deck, including the commander, has to be less than $1. So what kinds of cards are we going to be running in this deck? Well, let's jump into it to find out. So first up, we even have a mana rock that can cantrip thanks to Vega with Soul Talisman. It's essentially a soul ring, but it's got no mana cost, and instead of that, it's got to spend 3 for 1. So essentially we suspend it for 1, and then in 3 turns, we get to cast it for free. And again, thanks to Vega, when we do that, we get to draw a card. So it's kind of like a 1 mana delayed cantrip soul ring in a way. Regardless, next up, let's quickly go through some efficient mana rocks that we're going to be utilizing with Prismatic Lens, Fractured Power Stone, Ebony Fly, Everflowing Chalice, Liquid Torque, Sky Diamond, Marble Diamond, and Azorius Signet. Each of these essentially can cost 2 and tap for 1, and again, when it comes to efficiency for mana rocks, I want at least half the amount of mana back that I put into them. Regardless, some more interesting cards that can help us manage our mana are Stoic Farmer, Cosmos Charger, and Sage of the Beyond. Stoic Farmer is a 3/3 dwarf peasant that has Foretell for 1 and a white. When it enters the battlefield, we get to search our library for a basic plains card and reveal it, and if an opponent has more lands than us, we get it onto the battlefield tapped. So since we're an Azorius deck, chances are at least one player is going to be in green outside of us, and they're probably going to be ahead of us in lands, so yeah, we usually can ramp with this. And again, by foretelling it, we draw a card thanks to Vega too. And then Cosmos Charger is another foretell card, and on top of that, it's got Flash and Flying, and foretelling cards from your hand cost 1 less and can be done on any player's turn. So now we can foretell for just 1 mana and whenever we want to. And then Sage of the Beyond can help us save mana in a different way. It says spells you cast from anywhere other than your hand cost 2 less to cast. So obviously this reduces the cost of foretell cards, but also other cards that we'll get to here in a bit. Next up, there's Renard the Ever Watchful, which can help us out in multiple ways. It says the first card you foretell each turn costs 0 to foretell, and whenever you exile 1 or more cards from your hand and or permanents from the battlefield, create a 1/1 white sphere creature token with flying. So this allows us to foretell freely, and again, if we've got Cosmos Charger in play, that's 1 free foretell on every single turn. Regardless, it's also going to be making us spirits whenever we foretell, and whenever we do other things as well that make us exile cards from our hand, like, suspend. So this can not only help us save mana, but also make us a ton of tokens throughout the game. Speaking of saving mana, there's Jace's Sanctum, which says, instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, scry 1. This works fantastically with Vega. Whenever we cast that instant or sorcery spell from outside of our hand, we scry 1, and then we get to draw the card. And then Monk class can also help reduce the cost of certain spells. It says the second spell you cast each turn costs 1 less to cast. On top of that, when this becomes level 2, we return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. And then this class's level 3 is at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. For as long as it remains exiled, it has, you may cast this card from exile as long as you've cast another spell this turn. And again, whenever we cast those spells, we draw even more cards with Vega. But we even have more ways and more effective ways to draw even more cards. So let's start off this section with the Golden Pig of this deck, which is the #1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig in this deck is Future Sight. Future Sight is an enchantment for 2 blue, blue, blue. It says play the top card of your library revealed, you may play the top card of your library. This card does an absurd amount of work in this deck. Allowing us to play cards off the top of our library is already a massive form of card advantage. But with Vega, it's doubly so. Because again, every single one of those spells that we cast, we are casting from outside of our hand because you know it's on top of our library, which is not our hand. Obviously. Anyways, whenever we cast one of those spells, we also get to draw a card. So this essentially allows pretty much every single spell in our deck to cantrip thanks to our commander. And some things can even cantrip multiple times thanks to this, and we'll talk about those mechanics here in a bit. But yeah, overall, Future Sight is an incredible card in this deck, and that's why it's the Golden Pig. Regardless, there is essentially a creature version of Future Sight with Magus of the Future, which is basically the exact same thing, but it's a 2/3 human wizard, and the only reason that this isn't also the Golden Pig is because enchantments are harder to deal with. And then we have yet another kind of version of Future Sight with Precognition Field. It says you may look at the top card of your library, you may cast the top card of your library if it's an instant or sorcery card, and by paying 3 we can exile the top card of our library. So it's kind of like the same thing, but just for instants and sorceries, and it can help us get rid of dead cards on top. Regardless, now let's move on to some draw spells that work really well with our commander thanks to their mechanics. So when it comes to suspend, let's utilize some cards like Aeon Chronicler and Inspiring Refrain. Aeon Chronicler has suspend X for X3 in a blue, and X can't be 0, and whenever a time counter is removed from Aeon Chronicler while it's exiled, we draw a card. And of course, when its time counters are up and we do cast it, we get to draw yet another card thanks to our commander. But an even better suspend card in this deck has got to be Inspiring Refrain. It says draw 2 cards, exile Inspiring Refrain with 3 time counters on it. So thanks to our commander, this is basically, hey, suspend this for 2 in a blue, and every 3 turns you get to draw 3 cards. And it keeps doing that over and over again throughout the game. Regardless, now let's move on to some Foretold cards with Ethereal Valkyrie, Behold the Multiverse, and Tales of the Ancestors. Ethereal Valkyrie has flying, and when it enters the battlefield or attacks, we draw a card, then exile a card from our hand face down. It becomes Foretold. Its Foretell cost is its mana cost reduced by 2. So basically this card can give essentially any card in our deck Foretell, which is really fantastic. And then Behold the Multiverse has Foretell for 1 in a blue, and it says scry 2, then draw 2. Next up, there's Tales of the Ancestors, which is a great panic button card that you don't necessarily want to have to use, but when you do need it, it can really help you out. It says each player with fewer cards in hand than the player with the most cards in hand, draw cards equal to the difference. So if you somehow are low on cards and need to refuel or need to catch up to another player that somehow is drawing more cards than you, this will get you right there. And it might just earn you some brownie points from your other opponents that are lower than them too. Again, you're not going to want to use this, but it's a fantastic panic button when needed. Next up though, we also can utilize some flashback cards like Think Twice, Scour All Possibilities, and Deep Analysis. Thanks to Vega, when we flashback Think Twice, it's going to draw us 2 cards. And then Scour All Possibilities is going to have us scry 2, then draw 2 cards. And then when we flashback Deep Analysis for just 1 in a blue and 3 life, we're going to draw 3 cards. Again, Vega is the type of commander that can just keep piling on the value. And then in a similar way, we can also utilize some jumpstart cards like Radical Idea and Chemist's Insight. Radical Idea is going to draw us 2 cards, and Chemist's Insight's now going to draw us 3 thanks to Vega. But an even better card than these in this deck might be Una's Grace. It has Retrace, so we can cast it from our graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying its other costs, and it's going to draw us 2 cards. Or at least I should say again, it draws us 2 cards when we retrace it from our graveyard. And because it doesn't exile when we do that, we can just keep doing this as long as we can keep paying the cost. So in a way, it's kind of like an instant speed divination that's repeatable whenever we need it. But outside of drawing a ton of cards, we also have some cards that can help us have some really high value plays. So first up, let's talk about Chaos Wand, an artifact that has pay 4 and temp. Target opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile an instant or sorcery card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. So pick the opponent that you think has the best instant or sorcery that you need for the situation that you're in, and yeah, pay for it, target them, and have some fun, and then when you do cast that card, remember to draw a card with Vega. And speaking of casting your opponent's cards, let's talk about Talent of the Telepath. It's going to make target opponent reveal the top 7 cards of their library, and you can cast an instant or sorcery from among them without paying its mana cost, and if you've got Spell Mastery, you cast 2. So again, with Spell Mastery, which is incredibly easy for this deck to meet, you draw 2 cards as well. And then Diluvian Primordial goes even further, because when it enters the battlefield for each opponent, you may cast up to 1 target instant or sorcery card from that player's graveyard without paying its mana cost. So now cast up to 3 cards for free and draw 3 cards. But we can even get more value out of one of our own spells again with Spell Twine. It's going to let us cast an instant or sorcery from our graveyard and an opponent's graveyard as well. So we're casting 2 spells for free and we're drawing 2 cards. And then Sakashima's Protege has Flash and Cascade. So when we cast this spell, we exile cards from the top of our library until we exile a non-land card that costs less, then we can cast it without paying its mana cost. So again, because of that, yep, we get to draw a card. And Sakashima's Protege can enter the battlefield as a copy of any permanent that entered the battlefield this turn. Keep in mind again that this does have Flash, so yes, this can be very beneficial in copying our opponent's things. And speaking of our opponent's things, we can just straight up take one of them with Inevitable Betrayal. It's got to spend 3 for 1 blue, and it says search target opponent's library for a creature card and put that card onto the battlefield under your control, then that player shuffles. So if your buddy has a Blightsteel Colossus in their deck, well, they better look out. But of course, we've got plenty of ways to take out our opponents with our own things as well. So first up, let's talk about Nomad's Assembly, which says put a 1/1 white core creature token onto the battlefield for each creature you control, and it's got Rebound. Rebound basically means that when you cast it, you exile as it resolves, and at the beginning of your next turn's upkeep, you can cast it without paying its mana cost. So when we cast it that second time from exile, we get to draw a card. And you know, double up our army again. And we can already make a giant army with things like Murmuring Mystic and Talren Sky Summoner. Each of them make us a creature token whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, Murmuring Mystic making us a 1/1 bird, and Talren making us a 2/2 drake. Each of those have flying. And of course, we can make even more tokens with things like Dika, Metallurgic Summonings, and Ominous Seas. Dika says, whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token, put X+1 counters on it where X that spell's mana value. So depending on how big that spell is, the creature is going to be just as big. And the same is true for Metallurgic Summonings, which says, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create an XX Colors Construct artifact creature token where X of that spell's mana value. On top of that, by paying 3 blue, we can exile it and then return all instant sorcery cards from our graveyard to our hand, but we can only activate if we control 6 or more artifacts. And then next up, we've got Ominous Seas, which says, whenever you draw a card, put a Foreshadow counter on Ominous Seas, and by removing 8 of those counters, we get an 8/8 Kraken. Again, this deck is incredibly proficient at drawing an absurd amount of cards, so have fun with all those Krakens. And also have fun keeping all those cards around when you get Wizard class in play. First up, it says you have no maximum hand size, then by getting it to level 2, it says you draw 2 cards, and then by getting it to level 3, whenever you draw a card, you get a +1 counter on target creature you control. So, though your opponents might not believe that Vega can actually take them out with Commander damage, with this, it definitely can. Or you know, you can just drain your opponents out with Psychosis Crawler, which says whenever you draw a card, each opponent loses 1 life. And the final way that you can easily take out your opponents is of course with Approach of the Second Sun. Basically, the first time that you cast it, it goes into your library 7th from the top and you gain 7 life, and the second time you cast it, you win the game. Keep in mind though that this does need to be cast from your hand to actually win the game, so make sure you don't cast this the second time with something like Future Sight, okay? Regardless, now that we've talked about our plans and how we're gonna win, let's quickly go through some ways to throw a wrench into our opponent's plans. First up, we can really utilize some protection spells like Emerge Unscathed, Ephemerate, and Glorious Protector. Emerge Unscathed is going to give target creature we control protection from the color of our choice until end of turn, and it's got Rebound. Ephemerate also has Rebound, and it's going to blink a creature we control. And then Glorious Protector has Flash, and it's going to exile any number of non-angel creatures we control until it leaves the battlefield, and it's got a foretell cost of 2 and a white. So this can be a fantastic way of protecting a lot of our creatures when an opponent casts a board wipe. And then we can actually protect ourselves in combat with Ith High Arcanist. It has to spend 4 for white-blue, and it can tap to untap target attacking creature and prevent all combat damage to be dealt to and dealt by that creature this turn. And then Prismatic Strand says prevent all damage that sources of the color of your choice would deal this turn, and it's got flashback by just tapping an untapped white creature we control. Next up, there's Mass Diminish, which says until your next turn, creatures target player controls have base power and toughness 1/1, and it's got flashback for 3 and a blue. So this can really put an opponent into a really bad spot, making all their creatures very, very, very tiny until your next turn. Next up, we've got some bounce suspend cards with Riftwing Cloudskate and Reality Strobe. When Riftwing Cloudskate enters the battlefield, we can bounce target permanent to its owner's hand. And then Reality Strobe does the exact same thing, and it also is going to re-exile itself with 3 time counters on it. So essentially, every 3 turns, we draw a card. And then next up, we've got 2 foretell cards with Depart the Realm and Raven Form. Depart the Realm is going to bounce target non-land permanent back to its owner's hand, and Raven Form is going to exile target artifact or creature, and its controller creates a 1/1 bluebird creature token with flying. And then we've got some wrath spells with Divine Reckoning, Spectral Deluge, and Dusk to Dawn. Divine Reckoning says each player chooses a creature they control, destroy the rest, and it's got flashback. Spectral Deluge says return each creature your opponents control with toughness X or less to its owner's hand, where X the number of islands you control, and it's got foretell for 1 blue. And then Dusk is going to destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater, and then Dawn is actually going to bring us back all of our creature cards with power 2 or less from our graveyard to our hand. Next up, we've got some more wraths with Slash the Ranks, Time Wipe, and Aether Gale. Slash the Ranks is going to destroy all creatures and planeswalkers except for commanders. Time Wipe's going to bounce a creature we control back to our hand, then destroy all creatures. And Aether Gale is going to bounce 6 target non-land permanents back to their owner's hands. Finally, we've got some counterspells that can help us out as well with Saw It Coming, Forceful Denial, and Negate. Saw It Coming can counter target spell, and it's got a foretell cost of 1 and a blue. Forceful Denial is going to counter target spell, and it's got Cascade. And then Negate is just simply going to counter target non-creature spell. But now that we've gone through every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about this deck's price. Again, like I mentioned earlier, every single card in this deck, including our very budget-friendly commander at 4 cents, is going to be less than $1. So, as you can see on the left of the screen, it is a very budget-friendly deck at just $28.52. And actually, it's even more budget-friendly than that if you've already got the basic lands, because Scryfall is counting every single one of those basics at 10 cents a piece. So yeah, you can save like another $2. And again, on top of that, if you're willing to play with heavily played and damage cards as well, you can save even more on TCG Player. Though, keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which can definitely vary depending on where you're at. And with that, the show is coming to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thanks again and have a good one.